You're about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 366 of Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm Maddy.
And I'm Bridgett.
And today we're looking at Moulin Rouge because it is musical month. Also, I just have to say that it's my first time hosting an episode, so if things get a little messed up, it's just me. Don't blame the podcast. But no, we're gonna have so much fun with this. Bridgett and I have been wanting to do some musicals for a while now, and we've even got a Patreon poll up right now for nominating the musical Patreon pick of the month. So make sure that you go see that, get your voice heard. Maybe we'll get to see one that we haven't seen yet. I don't know. It seems like there was a lot of familiar ones in there that I'd love to cover, though. But this movie that we're covering today is Moulin Rouge. And this movie was directed by Baz Luhrmann and produced by Martin Brown, Fred Barron, with music by Craig Armstrong, Anu Malik, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and another weird one, Marie DeVry. Well, yeah. It is starring Nicole Kidman, Ewan McGregor, John Leguizamo, Jim Broadbent, and Richard Roxburgh. And Bridgett, why don't you hit us with a summary of what this film is about?
Yeah, some plot summary for Moulin Rouge is that it is a jukebox musical, and it's a tragic comedy that follows a Scottish poet named Christian who falls in love with the star of the Moulin Rouge, a cabaret actress and courtesan named Satine, who is pursued by a jealous duke. Christian must overcome all odds to prove to Satine that he loves her and save her from this dark yet colorful Parisian underworld.
It just sounds so intriguing. It's a very colorful musical for sure. Yes. And since it is musical month, I thought we'd talk just a little bit, a few fun facts about Moulin Rouge and what makes it unique as a musical. As Bridgett stated, it is a jukebox musical. And you might be wondering, maybe some of you don't know, what a jukebox musical is. And it is a musical that uses popular music in the score. So meaning that most of the music is not original music, or even not at all. In this particular movie, though, in Moulin Rouge, there is one original song, and it is Come What May. But all the other songs in the musical are sampled in either part or whole from other artists, mostly modern pop artists. So, and the only other musical I can think of that does this is Mamma Mia. That I've seen is Mamma Mia with all their songs are from ABBA, so it's very ABBA centric, but same concept. Moulin Rouge is also part of the Red Curtain trilogy by Baz Luhrmann. I don't remember if any of you guys remember the episodes on the Cornetto trilogy, which is like Shaun of the Dead, World's End, and Hot Fuzz. So it's kind of the same thing where none of them are actually related to each other in a sense that they take place in the same story world, but they're all thematically tied. So his other movies in this trilogy are Strictly Ballroom, which is another movie that I really love. His version of Romeo and Juliet, which is another good one. So it's basically all theater centric. It's very theatrical techniques that he uses, or theatrical big, like, out of this world theatrical themes. So we're going to dive right into our spoiler-free thoughts. And basically we're going to go over whether we thought it was stale, fresh, or buttered and salted. Bridgett, why don't you hit us with your spoiler-free thoughts first?
Okay. So I went with a fresh rating for this movie. I think that it's the kind of movie, if you know Baz Luhrmann's directing style, then you have an idea of what you are in for with this movie. You are going to get exactly the things that you expect from him. Like you just said, Maddie, it's over the top theatrical, very, very colorful, and just that liveliness and vibrance that he brings to so many of his movies. So if that is something that you are into, then this movie could be a good fit for you. But I think one of the reasons I have a hard time going to Buttered and Salted with this movie is because I think that style, it doesn't speak to a lot of people as well. And so I went with the fresh rating for that reason. So, and for me, just some other spoiler-free thoughts. This for me is a musical that has grown on me over time. It's not, even to this day, it's not one that I can say is necessarily in my top favorites. But it is a movie that I went from really actually disliking the first couple of times I saw it to now having very different thoughts about it upon further viewings. So I appreciate that about it. And I know we'll do some talking about the cast in this movie as the conversation goes on, but I think that is worth mentioning here as well. That I think a movie that is as over the top as this one really only works if you have a cast that is simultaneously being able to pull off being sold out to the roles that they are performing, but also being self-aware of how over the top the movie is. So I think because this cast does such a great job of striking that balance, they're able to engage the audience and bring them along on this very wacky, zany, Baz Luhrmann-y kind of journey with them.
I like that, Baz Luhrmann. It's a new adjective. I have to say I'm pretty much on the same page, except I think I'm gonna go full Buttered and Salted.
Okay.
But I will say that I was the same way as you. The first time that I watched this movie, I didn't even finish it. Like, I turned it off in the first 15 minutes because I was just so, like, weirded out. Like, I'm like, what kind of drug-induced fantasy am I watching here? And it feels very much like that in the beginning. It's like, oh my gosh, this is like almost as I feel the same way about the live-action Grinch movie. Like
Yeah.
somebody was on drugs when they when they made this movie, and that's kind of what I felt about this one. And but everyone kept telling me like how great it was, like even like Christians, which surprised me because I'm like it's a movie set, in a burlesque, it's like a brothel basically. And like, how is this going to be good in any sense? But they're like, you have to watch it. It's an experience. And I think maybe I dived in head first with Baz Luhrmann with this movie, and it wasn't the right time for me, because then I watched Strictly Ballroom, which I absolutely love. That it's a little less zany than this one, but still zany. It's still weird. It's still very Baz Luhrmann-y. And then Australia is actually one of my favorite movies too. I really love that with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman in that one. And so like I was getting into Baz Luhrmann. I'm like, I like this style. And I did watch Romeo and Juliet, and then I finally watched this one again. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just awesome. This is stellar. Stellar cast, engaging love story. It definitely has made like my top 3 musicals as of lately. Like on this last viewing, it bumped it up in my opinion. Like I feel like each time I watch it, I gain something new from it. And it just pulls at all the right strings for me. And I do kind of like weirder, zanier movies sometimes. So I just felt like it's really like gone up in my opinion. So
Yeah, it's so funny to me that we both have this trajectory of like the first time we were introduced to this movie, we were like, no thanks.
Yeah.
And for me, what kept me coming back actually was this movie came out when I was in high school, and I had a high school friend group, and one friend in particular who just absolutely adored this movie. So when our friend group was together, it was always a very popular pick. And every time I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. And then finally, like over time, it finally grew on me. But yeah, so I think it's funny how I think Baz Luhrmann can have that effect on people that at first it's kind of off-putting and it's like, I don't really know what I'm in for here. But then if you can go into it knowing what to expect, I think oftentimes then the story can take over. And I'm with you too. I have watched this movie several times, but last night I was watching it prepping for this episode and had it resonated with me on an emotional level last night differently than it ever had before. So I'm really interested in diving into that with you in this episode as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to, because I said it was in my top 3, and I was just wondering, what are your top 3 favorite musicals?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is such a hard question for me to answer because
I know, that's why I asked it.
It's so hard. I feel like this is, it's like as soon as I pick one to put into the top 3, I'm going to be like, well, there are 5 more that I'm leaving out. So
exactly.
What I had to do was I just had to think of like, what are the ones that come to my mind when I think of what resonates with me emotionally. So Moulin Rouge, like I said, did that when I was watching it last night in a new way. So I might have to watch it again and see if that trend continues. But yeah, exactly. Historically for me, I would say my top 3, number 1 is always going to be West Side Story for me. I adore West Side Story. Yeah. So yeah, that's my number 1. Another show that I have had quite an emotional journey with is Les Mis. I think the first time I ever saw Les Mis, the first time I ever saw it was the movie. Actually, I hadn't seen it on stage before the movie came out.
What about the book? Did you read the book?
I actually read an abridged version of the book. But
that's probably actually smart. I read the unabridged version, but I ended up skipping a lot of chapters.
Yes. Yeah. Have you ever seen the Liam Neeson movie version?
Yes. I've seen I think I've seen almost every version of
Yes. Yeah. And so I actually had watched that movie version in my younger years and not realized how untrue to the story it actually is in a lot of ways. Yeah. But it's a good movie anyway, in its own right. And so that I gave my third spot. I kind of have a tie here if you'll let me do that. But there's a relatively new musical called Bandstand that came out shortly before COVID. I think it was on Broadway maybe I want to say maybe 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. And then it went on a national tour right before the COVID lockdown. I got to see the national tour of it. And that was a very emotional experience that I had with that one as well. I also love The Sound of Music. I have to get The Sound of Music in there just because it's one of my all-time childhood favorites. So
I agree.
Yeah, so that's probably my top 4.
Yeah, I like that. I would say I have to tie some as well. Yeah. So I think West Side Story is still holding out at number 1, although Moulin Rouge is creeping up there. And then maybe I'll have to say Moulin Rouge. And I don't know. Again, I'm having a tie actually. So I used to like Les Mis so much, and it's actually gotten knocked down over the years a little bit. Maybe it's because I watched it too much or something, but I still really love it, and I still really love the music from it. But now I'd have to say that for my third spot, I'd go for either Phantom of the Opera, which is very nostalgic for me. My dad loved listening to that album. We would always listen to that. So he introduced me to that. And honestly, Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof, the last couple times I've watched it, has really tugged on my heartstrings emotionally.
Yes, yeah, so, that's a classic. I love that.
Yeah, all good ones, and maybe we'll cover one coming up soon. We hope, right?
Yes, that would be great.
But in the meantime, let's give our popcorn theology ratings real quick before we do our promotion stuff, and then after our ads, we're going to jump right in. So just a quick theology rating. Did you think it was diluted, carbonated, or my cup runneth over theme-wise?
So on my own, I rated this as carbonated, but then I was taking a peek at your notes coming into recording this episode, and I think I am so excited to have this conversation because I think we came at our approach to this musical from 2 different directions. And so seeing the way you came at it was something that I had never thought of before. So I think I think my thoughts were carbonated, but then when I see what you came up with, I'm like, maybe we can get into cup runneth over territory here.
Yeah. I definitely would say my cup runneth over. It actually says carbonated in the notes here, but it's because I copy and paste the notes from previous episodes, and sometimes I forget to change things. And like that actually wasn't my rating. My rating is definitely cup runneth over with themes, and I started noticing that again, maybe the last time I watched it, and then on this watching, I was just kind of honestly blown away by how many. I was like, oh man, I could go so many different directions with this. So let's jump in to, we just want to ask, you guys make this podcast possible, so our listeners, and before we get to the movie, we just want to encourage you to like and share this episode with your friends, if you like what you hear. We just want to broaden the conversation. We want to share this with others, get into Facebook comment wars, maybe not that, but we really want you to talk about this stuff. It's the world we live in. We watch movies every day, and I think it's important as Christians that we talk about this stuff. So please like, share, rate the podcast. And if you want to hear more, Bridgett can tell you where that you can do that.
Yes, if you want to hear more from Popcorn Theology, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and follow us on social media, including on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord.
And another way that you can help us out is just to rate and review the podcast, either on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast. Or you can also support us financially through Patreon. And that gives you perks. It makes you a patron saint of our group. This gives you special access to a whole host of exclusive benefits, including a Facebook group and a special channel on the public Discord server. And you get to vote on future episodes. And for our premium seating members, you get a weekly In the Lobby podcast series podcast episodes. Those are really fun. Those are like topical conversations where we invite other podcasts and other people of note to have a conversation about movies and other things. It's really interesting. It also gives you access to join us live while we record episodes. So that is also really fun. So we hope that you will like, subscribe, share this episode, and we'll be right back with our spoiler thoughts.
Popcorn Theology has been mindfully viewing cinema from a godly perspective since 2015. But why? Where did it come from? Well, one of the inspirations was our host, James Harleman's book, Cinemagogue, published in 2012, exploring the intersections between film and faith. And now, fresh off the press, is an updated edition of the book, the Cinemagogue Director's Cut. This version contains over 40 pages of new content with reviews and recommendations, movie references, illustrations, further shaping the story-formed argument for God's existence while also delving deeper on hot topics like how we deal with sex and nudity in film. It's the how-to guide for all things popcorn theology. And this time, it's not just available on Kindle and in paperback, but also a hardcover edition for all you true book lovers. So if you like movies, if you're a cinephile, if you spend hours talking film, this book is definitely for you. Or if you're a casual consumer who thinks movie making exists merely for diversion, this book may just change your life. Cinemagogue available now at Amazon.com. For bulk orders or signed copies, check out Cinemagogue.com for details.
Ten years after a brutal war, former Navy SEAL Doyle in an armored bus prowls the broken remnants of a devastated America. Jonathan pastors a small church. When he meets Doyle, he sees an opportunity to expand his ministry. The two men strike a bargain. This journey will change them both in ways they could have never imagined, as Doyle's unbelief collides with Jonathan's faith. Eric Landfried's Solitary Man is an action-packed, post-apocalyptic story with a solidly biblical worldview. This ambassador international release and its sequel, Conflicted Man, are available today. Order directly at ericlandfried.com.
Hey, this is James, and if you're listening to Popcorn Theology, it's because you're interested in movies, or theology, or best of all, both. And that probably means you're our kind of people, sharing things in common with our community and maybe sharing common interests our listeners and viewers would be interested in as well. So why not partner with us and advertise your business or ministry right here on Popcorn Theology? We're looking for great, like-minded sponsors and offer reasonable rates with a variety of formats to get your message out. Remember, our fans aren't mindless consumers, so they'll give you thoughtful consideration. That's a big part of what we're all about. So for more information on advertising with us, contact info@popcorntheology.com.
Roxanne, you don't have Put on that red light. Walk the streets for money. You don't care.
And we're back. We are dropping the spoiler warning as we dig deeper into Moulin Rouge. Tried to say that right. My pronunciation is probably atrocious. But here it is. It is time for our fleshed out popcorn thoughts. So I kind of explained earlier that it took me a while to get into this one. And really on this last viewing of it, it just really touched me emotionally. The first time I watched this, all the way through, the first time I had said that I only watched the first 15 minutes of it. When I finally watched the whole movie all the way through, I wept, like full out sobbed. Not many movies could do that to me at the time. But I was telling Bridget, I think earlier over text, I'm like, nowadays though, I feel like I cry at every movie, so maybe it doesn't mean as much anymore. But like on this last viewing too, I was crying. It's just again, it's just when we were talking about Baz Luhrmann and his style, and again, it's not for everyone, but like once you get into it, it's like this frenetic, over the top, yet stunning and emotional. It's grounded all at once. He's really good at marrying the like all those like seemingly opposite things into one cohesive story, and that's what I feel about his movies, especially this one, is that it's funny, but he really lets you know that this is a story. It's not real, but yet it feels real, and it takes those great actors, like Bridget said, to pull that off. It's larger than life. It's a dream, but yet the characters are living in that dream. It's their reality. And on this particular viewing, I paid much more attention to song choices and costumes and colors, and I'm going to try to get more into those in the theology section. But I'm just always very impressed by the cinematography and the direction. It is a visually stunning movie, I think. And even though like the first half is much more crazy than the second half. So if you're scared of like what we've been talking about, like, oh, it's so crazy, and and Maddy turned it off in the first 15 minutes, and it's like, but like after like 25-30 minutes, it like settles down a bit. So it's kind of like it's good storytelling technically. It's kind of like popping this all in your face and getting all out there, and then it like kind of draws you in. You get drawn into this story. And on this last viewing, also just like cinematically wise, I think people have been having this conversation online, at least in like video essays that I've watched, and people asking like, why are movies today so lifeless and colorless and dull? And it's true, a lot of them. I think some people are starting to change that now. We're getting some better ones, but I think we just went through a phase where we had these very dull, kind of almost gray tone movies. And like watching this is just like a breath of fresh, colorful air, and it's just so different. I think the early 2000s had some really nice, colorful movies, and again, very Baz Luhrmann-y, as Bridget would say. But what are some of your deeper popcorn thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I have a lot of the same thoughts as you did on this one, Maddy. I think, well, and I wanted to ask you, if you don't want to answer this, obviously don't, but you said that once you finally watched this movie the whole way through the first time, that it made you weep. Do you mind me asking what it was? Was it a particular performance? Is it a particular scene? Is it the love story? What is it that got to you in this movie?
Yes, I think that is actually a great question, because I honestly, when I was writing my notes, I didn't even think about that. But like in particular, I remember the first time I watched it, and it's not like the obvious one at the end where she dies. Again, we're in spoiler territory now. This is a tragic movie. She dies in the end. Although I did weep at that, but that wasn't the first moment that made me weep. I actually started crying when he showed up at the final performance, and he had basically finally given up on her, and he threw the money at her, and basically like, I'm paying my prostitute, you know, I know you don't love me, but I'm just gonna pay you off and leave. And that just like broke my heart, to be honest. And because you know that she really does love him, and I think he knows that he really loves her, but he's just been so hurt by her. And it's just such an Ewan McGregor's performance in this movie is just top notch. Like, he is just he gives me all the feels. And again, like, the other part where I'm weeping is when he's weeping over Satine, and it's just like, you just feel like he's actually getting his heart broken. Like, he is literally weeping. It's not like a pretty cry, you know, like where they show a single tear running down the cheek. He's like ugly sobbing. But it's done in such a good way that it doesn't feel ugly. It just feels like he is totally broken and about this, and so good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being willing to answer that. The reason I asked is because I mentioned this to you last night too, when we were both watching the movie. I had never cried in this movie before. And then last night I did, and I couldn't believe it. I was like almost mad at myself. I was like, I've made it this far.
And what part did you cry at?
It was at the ending. It was,
okay.
Yep, when she dies. And I think part of what got me last night was, I mean, obviously Ewan's acting is just unparalleled. I mean, he's so good. But also I think I was struck by the fact that she dies in his arms. You know, it's not like they spend her final moments together in as much as they can. And he is the one who is there with her when she is drawing her final breaths. And in that too, she's making this request of him that he tell their story. So there was just something really emotional about that scene. I feel like all of the guys listening to this are going to turn this off. They're like, here are these two girls crying over this movie.
Oh, man. But you have to see Ewan McGregor cry, and then you'll cry too.
There's just something very affecting about that moment.
I think a man crying too in general is very heartbreaking, even for guys, because I don't remember what the context was. I was almost like, it was one of those memes, you know, where they're like, he never cries during movies, and then they show like a clip from like Braveheart or The Patriot, and they're like, yes, guys do cry during movies.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and listen, it's not just the chick flicks either. Okay, I just watched The Bike Riders over the last weekend, and Austin Butler cries at the end of that movie too. So, all right, the guys get their cries too.
It's okay.
It's okay. So I think there was so much that you said that I would echo just about Baz Luhrmann's style of directing. I think you hit on a really interesting point too, just about the cinematography of the early thousands. And I think it is so interesting. I know I've seen it on the Popcorn Theology Facebook page that we have so many people having this conversation about lighting in movies these days, and the use of color and the use of darkness versus light and things like that. And I have to admit that that's not something I have paid like specific attention to, but in seeing people have the conversation, it is something that has, you know, it's like, oh yeah, well, I guess, you know, that is something that I haven't really noticed, but it's true now that I'm thinking about it. But when you look back at some of those early thousands movies, you had Baz Luhrmann doing his thing. Another director who comes to mind who kind of goes in that more colorful direction in his movies too is Joe Wright. I think his Pride and Prejudice is a cinematic wonder. I could watch that movie with the sound off and just look at what he did with the cinematography in that movie. So yeah, I think, you know, it's a different time in cinematic history when you go back and watch this movie. I think Romeo and Juliet too, if I can just drift into that for a second. I haven't seen Strictly Ballroom, so I'm glad
it's
you brought
the same
that
way.
up.
It's colorful.
yeah, that's going to have to go on my watch list now. So Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet is so interesting, I think, because as a high school English teacher, I have spent the last 6 years of my life teaching Romeo and Juliet. And what I have found is that I do like to show a movie version of it just because it helps draw the kids into the story more if they have an idea of what's going to happen. But I cannot show them Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet version first. We have to watch a different version first so that they can understand the story. Because then even when they know the story, if we end our unit by coming back and watching Luhrmann's version, they're like, huh.
Yeah.
It's very different, and they like it, but it's not the version that I can jump to if I just need them to understand what's going on in the story. So I think that kind of that summarizes Baz Luhrmann a little bit. Don't ever judge him, like you said before. Don't ever judge him based on the first 15 minutes of the movie, because you're going to feel like, what am I doing here? What is going on? It feels almost like you don't have anything to ground you in reality at the beginning of his movies. But eventually his story and his characters will draw you in. He always casts great, talented actors in his movies that I think are particularly gifted at being able to bring his stories to life. Lesser talent would make these movies probably borderline unwatchable, but when you get really great actors in there, then that makes all the difference. So yeah, give it a shot. If this is one you haven't seen before, check it out and see what you think. It's not for everybody, but it could be for you.
Absolutely. Agreed. On a side note, I love that you like show Shakespeare too, like movies, because I was never, and I was like almost an English major. Like I almost went for English as my degree. So I love reading, but I always had trouble reading Shakespeare. And then I took a British lit class at my local community college, and I had this teacher. I will never forget him. He was so awesome. He was such a weird guy. He was like ancient. Like he was like from the 80s, and he always wore like sweatpants and like a sweatband, like literally like one of those 80s sweatbands to class. He did not care how he looked. He did not dress professional. He freaking loved Shakespeare. I mean, this man loved Shakespeare. And he was like, you can't read Shakespeare. You have to watch it. It was meant to be watched. It's, you know, it's a play. It's meant to be watched. So, and we would read a little bit of it, like, but he would show us Shakespeare movies. And I loved that. And it made me appreciate Shakespeare so much more, because like reading it is just so tough, because it's a very different language. It's almost like a different English than what we speak. So and unless you really know how to read that, and it makes it difficult. So I love watching, and there are so many Shakespeare stories that can be translated to modern times just because of the big overall arching themes, which is kind of what Baz Luhrmann is playing on with like all of his love story movies, is they are playing on big overarching themes. It's like it's a big obvious love story, and yet we're so invested in it. And like you can take, you know, The Taming of the Shrew and make 10 Things I Hate About You, and it's great. And it's the same thing with Clueless. That's an Emma story from Jane Austen. It was something, it's not Shakespeare, but it's the same concept where you take it from a different time period and put it into this. So, and I also love Romeo and Juliet for that. But yeah, you're right. It's hard to just dive into that one because it is pretty zany. But I also just love Claire Danes. I think she's so awesome. I love her.
Yes. Yep. Wholeheartedly agree.
But yeah, now that we've gotten off on a rabbit trail down there, let's bring it back to Moulin Rouge, why we love it. We're going to dive into some deeper talk about the theological themes that we found in this movie. And I guess I'll start with this one. I feel like mine's a little long. I'm going to try to get through. I have a lot of notes here, but like I had a lot of thoughts this time, and it was very interesting where I ended up, basically, because anytime that I had been recommended to watch this movie, I've heard many Christians say this, where it's like it's a Christ parallel story. Like Christian is like a Christ parallel, which I could see that, even though it's a flawed parallel, which we talk about on here all the time, where it's like, okay, just because we're saying that this person is a Christ figure doesn't mean, that they're perfect or you should follow their example and everything. But when I was watching it this time, and again, whenever you're watching something for Popcorn Theology, you tend to just notice things differently. That's what I find. Every time that I'm watching a movie for the podcast, I'm like, how come I never saw that before? And it's like, it really is. You can't be a mindless consumer. Even I still do it, even though I'm technically trained not to. I went to film school. Like, I am supposed to look at these things. But, like, sometimes you just kind of zone out and you're just watching it and you like it, but you're not sure why you like it. And then you watch it for a specific reason. And then you're like, wow, this is amazing. And so what I found is I did not find another Christ parallel. We're not going to talk about that. I think Christian is symbolic of a Christian. Honestly, that simple. And maybe even a particular Christian. I'll get to that. But first, I kind of wanted to flesh out, again, like we were talking about, overarching big picture themes, which is what this Red Curtain trilogy is all about. This is what Moulin Rouge is all about. And Baz Luhrmann based this story on the story of Orpheus. And so for those of you who don't know their Greek mythology, Orpheus was a mortal musician whose wife, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Eurydice, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but we're gonna go with that, was bitten by a snake and she died. And so she goes to the underworld. And he travels to the underworld, where Hades is moved to let him take his wife back to the world above, but only if they don't look back. But when he sees the sunshine ahead, he looks back at her and she disappears. She's lost him forever. And so that's what this story is based off of. And now this should remind you of another story. I mean, immediately I was like, okay, Lot and his wife, like, don't look back. She looked back. She was lost forever. But honestly, that one doesn't work even as well as the other one I found. But again, like, there's so many symbolic themes that I see in here. That's just like one of them. But the one that I really landed on was that it dawned upon me watching this time that, again, Christian was not a messiah or savior, or even really like Lot, but this is basically a retelling of the story of Hosea and Gomer. And I just, like, I can't believe it never hit me that way before. So our protagonist named Christian, right? And I don't think that's an accident. Again, it might be, but I feel like that's highly doubtful. So he's obsessed with love, right? It's like his whole thing. I'm obsessed with love. I moved to Paris to be part of the children of the revolution. I believe in freedom, truth, love, beauty. But he doesn't even know what love is. He admits it. He's like, but the problem is, I've never been in love. Until Satine. But she's a prostitute. She is flesh for hire. And yet he loves her completely. And he's even surprised by why he loves her. And so he woos her. And he saves her for himself, even when she strays. And again, this is just like Hosea and Gomer. This is a prophet who marries a prostitute. And God tells us this story because he was comparing Israel and himself. So as a husband whose wife has committed adultery, right? And he's using this visceral image and this real life situation. Like, he literally told Hosea to go and marry a prostitute in order to live out this symbolic of what was going on between God and Israel. And so God loves us even when we stray. So he wants to save us from the underworld. God wants us to save us from the underworld of sin. Christian wants to save Satine from this underworld of debauchery, and he wants to show her a better way. And I just love how, again, this is a musical, right? Musical month. And the music should help tell the story. And we already discussed that it's a jukebox musical, and they're just pulling different pop songs. But, like, it's amazing what the lyrics in these are saying and how it really helps to further the theme. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through, not every song because that would take way too long, but I'm going through, like, the main songs that tell the story, basically, and, like, how this mirrors the Hosea and Gomer story. So in the beginning, Satine enters, right? And she's singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. And one of the lines in there is, the French are glad to die for love. They delight in fighting duels. But I prefer a man who lives and gives expensive jewels. So she is a material girl living in a material world. That's the other juxtaposition of the song. They mash those two together. But Christian comes in and changes that. And in your song, Christian shows her what true love is. He's not about using her. He's about lifting her up and seeing her as a person and not an object. And I find it interesting in this movie because, again, you could walk away from this movie and maybe think that they're trying to glorify sin a little bit, you know, like, oh, look at this colorful brothel and the colorful costumes, and it's just fun. Everyone's having fun. But it's really not. It's candy-coated misery. Mm-hmm. And I think that they show that And I honestly don't think they would make this movie today, because in that bedroom scene, right before he sings that song, he's so embarrassed by her behavior in that scene. And I won't describe it for you because I don't want to get like doxxed or anything, but it can be a little weird. But she's acting like a prostitute basically, and he's very embarrassed by that. And by the end of that song, she's embarrassed by it as well. So he changes her outlook on this, which leads us into our next song, basically, Satine's song by her solo, Someday I'll Fly Away. Someday I'll fly away, leave all this to yesterday. So she wants to leave, but how? And then we move into the Elephant Medley, which that is my favorite song in this movie. It's not one song though, it's a juxtaposition of many, many different songs. But it's so beautiful. And one of the lines in there is, love makes us act like we are fools. So again, she's going back into her mindset. So she thinks that love makes you weak and poor and foolish, but we know that God uses what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. So, and again, Christian is changing all her outlook on this. So then we're going to skip over a couple songs and we're going to go to Come What May, which that's the only original song in the movie. And I kind of view this, and again, this is kind of a, there's no wedding in this movie. Like, Christian never marries Satine, so I want to get that out of the way. And I don't condone that. Like, but I don't think the film, again, it's not about that, so it's not that kind of story. So I don't blame it. And again, this is a secular director. He's making a secular movie, even though has some awesome biblical themes that are in there that he may not have meant to put in there. But I view this song kind of like their wedding song, because it's basically a song about making vows to each other. They're promising to each other that they're going to be together till the end of time. I'll love you till my dying day. So this is kind of like their covenant making song to me. So if there is a marriage in this movie, it's that song.
It's like One Hand, One Heart in West Side Story.
Yes.
No marriage, but
no marriage.
It's as close as we can. So
yeah, it's in a church. It's like basically you're there. So thematically we're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is like basically their wedding song. So they are promising basically fidelity to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then the very next, or I think there is another song in between that, but next song that we're going to jump into is Roxanne, which is like the total opposite of that. And so Roxanne is the number, shows you how destructive sin can be, how it kind of pulls you back in. Satine's tempted by the material worldly things again. She's like, I just have to be with this duke, for one night, and then he'll give us whatever we want. We can end the show how we want. I'm going to get this beautiful diamond necklace. And just Christian is just utterly distraught by this. And this is actually another one of my favorite numbers in here, to be honest. It's a very visceral scene, and it is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that I feel like this movie does really well, is showing jealousy not as like a bad thing, because like sometimes we say that our God is a jealous God, and that's not a bad thing to say that, because he is. And I think Christian is jealous of Satine in all the right ways. She shouldn't be doing this. It's sinful. And they never use the word sinful in this movie, but you can just, again, by his acting and the dance numbers, that he's just utterly heartbroken, distraught, and he just wants her to come back to him. And so that kind of moves into this darker version of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend for their next to final number. So the Diamonds song, got Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend song that came before was so glitzy and glamorous and fun. Again, those first like 20 minutes of the movie, it's so zany and crazy. And we get that same song, and yet it's totally different this time. It's dark, literally. Like the whole thing is like got a blue tint over it, and it's very somber. And you just know that like this isn't the right thing to want. Like she shouldn't be wanting this. And that's when Christian comes back, right? And he throws the money at her. He's kind of given up on her. And it's just so heartbreaking. I hate that scene. It just hurts me to watch. But then that goes into the reprise of Come What May. And one line in that song that I was noticing was, "Come back to me and forgive everything." So she's begging his forgiveness. She's like, "Please forgive me. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done this. I need you." And then that's where again, I don't know how, because I was reading the story of Hosea and Gomer again today, just to refresh, and we actually don't really know how their story ends, to be honest. Like, he did eventually buy her back from being in slavery and a prostitute, but it doesn't really say anything about how the rest of their lives went, so we don't really know. But in this story, tragedy strikes, right? And it's this tragic end to the story. But that's where I might disagree. I don't know if it's actually as tragic as I thought, maybe even the first couple times watching it, because it's not the end, it's the beginning. Like, literally, Christian has told us from the beginning that Satine is going to die. We know through the whole movie that this is going to be tragic. She's going to die. He's going to be left alone, and he's writing about it. But why is he writing about it? And you had said it earlier. It's like, they were dying in each other's arms, and she told him that he needed to tell this story, a story about a love that will live forever. And I don't think that's as tragic as people think. I think it's beautiful because it's transcending space and time, just like the Father's love for us. Even though we die in this life, our life is joined up with the other saints who have died for the same thing. And it's all a big love story. It's a story about the greatest love ever of the Son that he bestows on his bride, the church. And it's a story about love that will go on for all eternity eventually. And I'm just so glad that struck me this time, that's what I took away from this, because it does seem like a tragic story, and it's hard to watch the ending of this movie because you're like, they don't end up together. But that's not really the point, I think. I don't know. So those were my thoughts. I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I love and appreciate that you took this in the Hosea and Gomer direction, because that is not at all from my mind when I was watching this movie again. But I think that is such a great way to redeem the entire storyline of this movie. So I love that is. Yeah, it's a huge redeem.
It's a huge redeem.
I would like to ask you, because this might affect a couple of the things that I have to say about my theological talking points here. Since you just refreshed yourself on the story of Hosea and Gomer today from the Bible, if you can help refresh my memory as well, does Hosea ever go back to seek Gomer out of his own volition? Is he ever desiring himself to go get her back? Or is it more so God's prompting and telling him to do that?
I mean, the thing is that you don't really know the inner thoughts, because it's just kind of telling you very topically, like, what's going on. But I feel like he was obeying God. Okay. And I'm not sure that he necessarily wanted to, but it doesn't say that he didn't.
He didn't want to. Okay.
I guess you could interpret that either way. Like, again, it's kind of like with Abraham, like sacrificing Isaac, like,
right.
Did he really want to? It doesn't say that he didn't, of course, but like he was going to do it. Like he was going to obey. Yeah. But I personally wonder, since I think about those things, it's like, what was going on in your head? But like the Bible doesn't always give us that insight.
Right.
Which, in his providence, that's the story he chose to tell us. We can't add or subtract from it.
Right.
So we don't really know. But like, again, it doesn't say either or, in my opinion. I might want to dive into it again just to like make sure. But like overall, it's kind of a basic, like, God told him to marry this prostitute, and then she strayed, and God said, well, you need to take her back. But it doesn't really say how he felt about it.
Okay. Yeah. And the only reason I wanted to ask that, Maddy, I was just curious because my theological talking points for this movie are all much less based in the the redemptive element.
That's fine.
Much more based in the like, there's a lot in this movie I think that needs to be. I know we haven't hit our receive, reject, redeem portion of
Yeah.
the episode yet, but I kind of went being more like there is so much that needs to be rejected
Yeah.
in the way that this story is told.
I'm
And
actually glad that you did that because most of the time that's me doing that. Most of the time it's like, okay, Maddy came up with another negative point for this movie.
more reject.
And so like I was surprised this time that I had so much good to say about it. So like you
Yeah.
can be my devil's advocate this time.
Yeah, I love that there's so much balance here. And truly, because I hadn't thought of it from the Hosea and Gomer aspect, like I said. So I love that that's where you went. And I think if we're looking for biblical parallels, then that is a great parallel to make.
Yeah.
I think that story is so interesting because of how it's this larger allegory that God is using to depict his relationship with his church. And actually, one of the things I do have in my notes here to talk about is how often adultery is used to describe our hearts. And I think, as always, as we say on the podcast, we need to be careful that we don't put ourselves in the place of the biblical characters. But I think that is one direct parallel that we probably can make, that anytime we are worshiping idols, anytime that we are putting anything in God's place in our lives, we are adulterers. And the Bible is very strong in its language and in its imagery, calling out that behavior. So I think what makes the story of Hosea and Gomer so beautiful is that it's specifically depicting God's love for his church, that even when the church strays, that God calls us back, and it's by his grace and his mercy that we are even able to come back and beg for the forgiveness that we are in such desperate need of. And so for me, that it's that I guess element of righteousness, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use, but I'll come back and revisit that. But that is missing from the story of Moulin Rouge. And I think for me, what it comes down to is the fact that we have Christian starting at the beginning of the movie as you mentioned, a child of this Bohemian Revolution that's going on in Paris, and he decides he wants to be a part of it. And the pillars of this revolution are freedom, truth, beauty, and love. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me in this movie is that out of those four pillars of this movement, if you will, love is really the only one that gets any kind of deep treatment in this movie. We don't really find out a whole lot about what these revolutionaries think about freedom and beauty and truth, but love seems to be the one that they believe in, at least Christian believes in most of all. And he tells us that himself. Above all things, I believe in love, even though he had never experienced it. So there, I think, is an interesting biblical parallel that we are told in the Bible. These three remain: faith, truth, and love. Or I'm sorry, faith, hope, and love. Yeah. But the greatest of these is love. And so we do see a parallel there. But where this revolution falls apart is obviously in the fact that it has no foundation. There is no foundation for these pillars to stand on. So what was really striking me last night as I was watching this movie is just the absolute contradiction between the way that these revolutionaries live their lives and the way that we as Christians are called to live ours. And the starkest difference, I think, is that we have a foundation for our faith, hope, and love that they cannot have, because they are basing everything they believe in on human experience, which is maybe the shiftiest of all shifting sand. There's nothing solid there. There's no rock to support that kind of movement. Whereas the biblical foundation gives us the rock of Jesus Christ. We know when we say faith, hope, and love, we know what those are. We can define those terms. We have a standard for what that means because we can operate on God's definitions of those terms as opposed to what our own feelings dictate to us. So I thought you did a treatment of the songs in the movie. I thought just really quickly, if I can point out a couple of the different relationships in this movie that all have something to do with love, that seem to be depicting love in some kind of way. But in each of these depictions, we can see how when man is left to his own devices, then things fall apart so quickly. So you pointed out Christian's pursuit of Satine, the way that Hosea pursues Gomer, that Christian is not willing to allow Satine to continue in the life that she is in. And I kind of went the opposite way on the jealousy issue, because what kept coming up to me last night, what I kept noticing was that the basis of their it almost seems like their love is founded more on Christian's jealousy than it is on, and they have these emotional highs, right? They have the attraction, there's the physical aspect of their relationship, but it's never apart from his inability to let go of that jealousy. Now, like you said, that jealousy is founded. It's right for him to be jealous of her because she is giving herself to other guys. But I think what I kept coming back to is that he's not on a higher mission to go save her. If we are looking at this, if we want to talk about like parallels to our own lives, if you are a Christian man, unless God is specifically calling you to go make a prostitute your wife, that is not the kind of woman you should be seeking out, right? Like you're supposed to be seeking the Proverbs 31 woman, yes, which Satine absolutely is not. We don't get that picture from her. Now, could her life have worked out a different way? Like we don't know why she fell into this life of prostitution. We don't know. Maybe there's poverty, maybe there's abuse in her past. Like those are things that we don't know. Yeah. All we do know is that she is a prostitute, and Christian loves her, but because of what she does for a living, he's never going to be able to be rid of jealousy. Now, in this movie, I don't know that I see that necessarily as a depiction of Christ's jealousy for his church, the way we see it in the proverb of Hosea and Gomer. So that from like that, I struggle so much with trying to figure out what a relationship that would always have jealousy at its core, what kind of relationship could that possibly be? So that's their relationship with each other. I think Satine also loves Christian, but for how long and how deeply? Is how committed is she to her way of life? Is this just like he's great now, and if something better comes along later, then I'll move on to that thing? So I think this is the trouble that we get into when we have a feelings-based relationship as opposed to something that has a stronger foundation. I would love to get your thoughts on Zidler as a character, Harold Zidler. So for anybody who's not familiar with the movie, Harold Zidler is the owner of the Moulin Rouge. So I don't know what language I'm allowed to use on the podcast. He is the man who is in charge of Satine and making sure that she is entertaining the customers. So, do with that what you will. But I was really struck last night by their relationship. I think when I was a teenager watching this movie, it's easy to look at Harold and think, well, he's a good guy, right? Like, okay, so he's doing awful things, but he cares about Satine. He is almost like a father figure to her. And then I was watching this last night and I was like, no, he really is not. I hadn't watched this movie in quite a while. So I think maybe, I don't know, just being older watching it this time is what did it for me. But I was watching him last night and just so struck by the fact that I feel almost like he is someone that Satine wishes were a father figure. I think she maybe views him as a father figure, but he is prostituting her. He is the one who uses her for his own gain, his self-interest. The Moulin Rouge can make money if she sleeps with this duke. So go ahead, honey, and go sleep with that duke. Like what kind of father would ever treat his daughter that way? So if that is supposed to be a depiction of love, that is not what love should look like either.
Yeah.
Then we get to the Duke and Satine. So the Duke is the investor that Satine needs to sleep with in order to bring more money into the Moulin Rouge to keep it funded. And how does the Duke treat her? She is nothing but a possession to him. He's obviously a very, very rich man who is accustomed to just getting his way all the time in everything. And when he finds out that she doesn't actually love him, what does he do? He hits her. He abuses her physically. Again, this depiction of love. Now, I think there is something too to be said, Maddie, for the idea that I don't think the movie is condoning these types of love. That's not what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
What I am trying to say, though, I think, is that the ideals of this revolution are that love is whatever you want it to be. So who from this revolution could come in and say to the Duke, you're wrong for hitting her? If love is just what I want it to be, if love is just how I define it, then he can do whatever he wants. So it's more about the Bohemian Revolution itself, I think, just completely collapsing on itself in this movie. And maybe that's part of the point of what the movie's trying to show. But I don't know if maybe you have any input on any of the relationship ideas there.
Yeah, again, I think for me, it's like I'm always trying to understand it within the context of the film itself. But then also, like you said, yeah, obviously from a Christian standpoint, none of this is okay, again, unless directly ordained by God. When I'm drawing the Gomer Hosea parallel, I'm not saying that you should do that. That's not prescriptive, that's descriptive. There's a difference. But then I also have to understand things within the context of the movie. And again, just remembering that this director is not a Christian. He is secular, even if he's making some really great points. And I just feel like within the world of the film and the ideals that they have, that Christian does portray this higher love within the world of the film. And again, we don't really know that. And again, that's where, like you said, that's kind of where the film falls short in a sense. So you have him portraying certain aspects of this higher love, not objectifying her, being jealous in a good way sometimes, of not wanting her to sleep with other men, making promises to each other to be together. They're going to promise fidelity. But you're right, there is no foundation, but it's within the world of the film. So within this world, I understand that there is a standard, but it's kind of fuzzy. You don't really know the standard, but I think the director does a good job of, again, I think I said earlier in my portion, it's candy coated.
Yes.
But there's something disgusting underneath. So it's making this look like it's fun. It's making it look like, it's just free love, it's all this. But then at the same time, it's showing you some really dire consequences of living that kind of lifestyle and being in that underworld. And they literally, in the film, several times, they refer to themselves as things of the underworld, and other people say it's the underworld. So it's like hell almost, in a sense. This is not, I don't think that they're trying to portray it as a good thing, even though I think it would be easy for someone to walk away from this film thinking that it's not. But then I don't think they're paying attention. I think if you're paying attention, that Harold Ziegler is a bad guy. He's predatory. He literally is letting her die. He's not telling her about her sickness. He's using her to fund his thing.
I'm sorry.
Until it benefits him.
Yes. Right, exactly. Yep.
Yes. So it again, if you're watching that and you kind of feel like he's a father figure, again, I think it's cool that the director can actually do that, can make you kind of feel this way. But yet you also know that he's a scoundrel, honestly. And it's but Satine sees him as a father figure, so you're kind of oh, maybe he's just, trying to help her. But deep down, this is only benefiting him. And and again, they kind of, actually, that's another great number, The Show Must Go On, kind of explains that, where he's saying you have to do this for the good of everyone. This is for everybody. You know, we're going to survive if you do this. But yet, that's not good. We know that this is a bad decision. We know that it's going to lead to terrible consequences. But they're all in on this. You know, the show must go on. But yet, then, you know, we get further into the story and we realize that it won't go on. And that was one thing where I will say, because I think you had said, looking at the notes, basically that, like, Satine, like, she'll just be looking for the next thing to come along. But for me, she had that opportunity. She had that opportunity with the Duke. He was going to give her everything. He was going to give money to the Moulin Rouge. They were going to be funded for theater. He was going to make her an actress. So she could have had that. She could have had the next best thing that she wanted, but she didn't. So Christian ended up being the thing that she wanted most. And I, in my mind, and from seeing the whole story play out, for me, I'm pretty sure she was going to walk away from the Moulin Rouge if she didn't die. But again, we don't know that for sure. But, like, just me logically deducing from everything that happened, and she, you know, chose Christian over the Duke in that number, had me like, okay, and they're gonna walk out of there, except that then she dies.
And then she dies, yeah.
So I totally agree with you. Like, with that was actually going to be one of my rejects. So you stole my reject, because that's literally what I was gonna say is, like, okay, these ideals of beauty, truth, love, freedom, they mean nothing without a biblical foundation. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And I love to, I feel like in having this conversation, we're kind of bringing both of our perspectives together here. You know, like, I think you're absolutely right within the structure of the story that we're being told, that there's one way to read the story if we are able to, like, pretend that this is just real life for these characters. But then when you bring the biblical worldview into it from an outsider's perspective, then that's when things change. So yeah, I think there's definitely space for molding or melding, I guess I meant to say, those two views. I guess one question I have for you just really quickly too is, with Satine, if everything had worked out, even if she and Christian did get to leave the Moulin Rouge, do you think she would ever end up with buyer's remorse, especially when she finds out just what a penniless existence would look like for her, and all of her hopes for an acting profession are non-existent? Is there attraction? Is there enough to their love to keep them together?
I think so, because again, like, she knew she was dying at that point.
Yes.
So she knew that she was never going to, I don't think in any realistic sense, be a star, like be an actress, get that dream. And to me, again, like, this is where it's like the movie isn't telling you what to think. 'Cause, like, some movies are so obvious and they'll just tell you that. But I just, again, I'm deducing from what I'm watching that, again, she knows that this is fatal, basically. Even if she would have lasted a little longer, I think she knew that she wasn't going to last long. Like, back then, if you had TB, you were dying. There was no cure. So she knows that. And so even knowing that, it's like she could have had fame, in my opinion, for a little while, because the Duke was offering it to her. He could have like you said, she was rich, he had the money, he could have made her an instant star. She could have had it for maybe a year or two if she had, you know, if they'd treated her well for her sickness. But she didn't. She chose Christian. She chose, and again, you kind of see throughout that montage kind of in the middle of the movie where she's spending so much time at his flat and everything, and it just is very homey feeling, and like they're cooking dinner together and stuff with his friend. I don't want to say midget, but like that's what he is. I'm probably gonna get canceled for that now. But you know, with his friend, and he's the only one. That's another kind of off to the side note, but he's the only one of the friends that doesn't seem to always want to join in the debauchery. Like, and he does have a line in the film somewhere. He's like, "I know you see me as like this drunken, you know, guy who always does this stuff, but there's more to me as well. And that's I almost wish they'd explored his character a little more.
Yeah.
But just them all being together like in the kitchen, it just felt very normal. And again, that's juxtaposing that with the cabaret, where it's like you had, you know, all of this world and the cabaret. Now you're in his apartment and they're just doing very normal things together. And I just feel like that had to be kind of eye-opening for her to like just do normal things.
Yeah, I get
and
that
so for me, I feel like she had the chance to have it all with the Duke, and she still chose again that higher ideal within the world of the film, to love Christian, even if she was dying and she wasn't going to be there that long. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. And then if I can ask one more question, this probably would be the last thing before we hit our lightning round.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts too. You brought up the, I think this is happening over the course of the Roxanne scene, maybe if I'm remembering correctly, when you have all, like basically everybody who works for the Moulin Rouge just sitting inside the club while Satine goes to give herself to the Duke.
Yep.
And they just sit there and wait to see what happens, including Christian. But then, you know, like that whole song is about Christian being driven crazy by his jealousy and everything. And that was a picture that really struck me last night too. I don't remember paying that much attention to it when I was younger, but just this idea that there is no one there, not one single person who is willing to tell Satine that she doesn't have to go do this. Not one. Until the Duke gets violent, and then we see one of the performers come and save. And it's actually, I think, the second time in the movie that this man saves his life. And I think there's probably some symbolism there too that I don't know if we have enough time to dive into that. But so this man shows up and knocks the Duke out and saves Satine once the Duke gets violent. But I guess so that just that image of no one being willing to stand up for her. And then, so with that in mind, my question is, when Satine dies, do you think the Moulin Rouge ends? Or does Zidler find a way to maybe make amends with the Duke, have him come back as an investor, find another girl to elevate to that star role? So we see Christian's heartache at the end of this movie, but is Zidler heartbroken over the loss of Satine, or is he going to be fine?
Yeah, again, that's a difficult one because you know, we don't really get to see, you know, at the end you're imagining, you know, what's happening afterwards. But yeah, again, it's one of those weird things where I think Zidler was actually sad, but again, but for what purpose? That he lost his sparkling diamond. He lost his biggest moneymaker. And again, like, I'm sure he cared about her in a sense, but not that much. I don't know. I feel like it probably wouldn't have gone on. But as another note, I don't know if people know this, the Moulin Rouge is a real place. This is a fictional story, but that place is real, and it was very happened during late 1800s and 1900s Paris. And so I'm actually not, I'd have to look at it. I should have done a little more digging to see how long the Moulin Rouge actually did last and its popularity. But yeah, for the purpose of this story, again, I'm not really sure how that ends. Like, I want to think that it would have ended. But yeah, I can see how it definitely would not have, and how people probably would have just gone on. So
yeah. And I guess for me to close that all out, just you see Christian bookend the movie. He starts the movie as a penniless writer who comes to Paris with all this hope and looking for love. He ends the movie as a penniless writer, alone, but for different reasons this time. But we don't even see his friends around him anymore at the end of them. And maybe that's his choice. Maybe he pushed them away. But it's just such an acutely heartbreaking picture of the human experience to me when you have no hope, when there is nothing else you're placing your hope in. Christian got what he wanted love. But then when that love went away, he's broken as a man. And Zidler's, in my mind, Zidler is just off doing what he's been doing the entire time. The Moulin Rouge will be fine. Zidler will be fine. Yeah. He might miss Satine for what she brought him, but you know, the show must go on, right? It'll continue. I think that's another thing I love about this movie. Again, with the melding of the worldviews, just that if you separate yourself from what is going on in the movie, I think this movie is trying to depict this idea that when you do things this way, there is heartache that is going to be inherent in this kind of relationship. So
Absolutely. Well, that is awesome. I think we're just going to move right on into our lightning round then. And I'm going to let you start because I pretty much only had one reject and we kind of already discussed it. But if you want to flesh it out a little bit more, you can, or if you have another one that you want to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So I think we have talked at this point about rejecting the idea of those 4 pillars of the Bohemian Revolution that we get in this movie. And we're absolutely on the same page with that, if you can't define something, if you have no standard by which to define it, then it's sinking sand. So
it's just a word.
Yep, exactly. I think just one other reject that I have from this movie, I think, is that there are so many pictures, I think, in this movie of men not protecting women. I think we live in a time when it's not cool to be a man who wants to protect a woman. But I think that is a role that is very clearly defined and spelled out for men in the Bible. And I hope that we can get back to a time where maybe we're not talking so much about toxic masculinity and more so just about healthy masculinity. And I think the desire to protect is a God-given healthy desire. And I think the men in this movie do not live up to that. As a matter of fact, it's not even just not living up to it. It is flat out doing the opposite. Especially when we're talking about the characters of Zidler and the Duke and these men who are just straight up abusive to the women in their lives. So that absolutely is a reject on that.
I absolutely agree with that one. And I think that's, I noticed that more on this watching as well. I feel like where I was like, you're right. It's like no one says anything. I think Christian is the only one time does he, and it's right before the Duke thing where he asks her not to.
Yes.
So he's like the only one who asks her not to. It is interesting that so the name of that character, the African American guy, they call him Chocolate in the movie. So that's his character name. So Chocolate 2 times kind of saves Satine, and it's like, and you wonder, it's like one of those weird things where it's like, why did you have this character 2 times like save her? And like he's a big strong guy, but he also works at the Moulin Rouge as like a dancer too. It's just like one of those things where I almost feel like there's probably some scenes on the cutting room floor that we never got to see. And it just makes me so interested to like wonder what that was all about. But definitely agree that like most of the men in this movie are very predatory, and that's the thing, like I like, we can really tie this to modern times, and they had the Bohemian Revolution, we've had the sexual revolution here, and basically a woman can do whatever she wants with her body, whether it be abortion or selling herself on the streets, whatever. People want to make that kind of stuff legal because they want to say that it's a woman's choice. And that's, again, it's like one of those pillars, the pillar of freedom. Should we be free to do that kind of stuff? And it's like, freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you want. Freedom is the freedom to do what is right. Again, if you have that biblical foundation. So no, it's not okay to do that, and it breaks you. And like there's so many Instagram stories and reels that I've seen where women will go on a podcast and they'll say like, I was a sex worker. Like, it's not the glamorous thing that you think it is, which again, I think this movie kind of shows. This broke me. It broke my body. It broke me emotionally. And men out there, you should want to protect us women from that, because as a woman, I don't want that. It's not toxic to want to protect women from doing something that is going to hurt them. Like, you're not going to watch somebody walk off a cliff. You're going to say something. You're going to be like, hey, watch out. Don't go that way. Danger. But no, we've boiled it down to, well, it's her choice if she wants to do that.
Yep.
And it's like, but that's not a good thing. That's like letting somebody be an alcoholic or letting somebody be a drug addict, which some people also think is okay. So yeah, it's a very interesting point.
Yeah, and along those lines too, something I just was thinking of this while you were talking about it, but it's not even Christian who goes to get her. He doesn't
Yeah.
pursue her at
I
that
never
moment.
thought about that, but
Yeah, yeah. So like this moment, that's when she needs him the most, and now you're right. He did ask her not to go in the first place.
Yeah.
He does not go to
He just
retrieve.
didn't follow up.
Yeah. Yes. And I don't know, and maybe there's like the message in there of like he's trying to respect that it is her choice to go be with you.
It might
But
be.
also, come on, man, like go get your woman. So yeah. I think the other rejects that I had were things that we've already talked about. Zidler, when he says everything's going so well, that's entirely based on self-interest. And he just uses that blanket statement to like totally cover over all of the awful things that he's doing in order to get everything to go so well. So, reject that. And then obviously this movie depicts so many people following their fleshly impulses. There's, this is very much like a humanistic worldview kind of movie. And I think we need to soundly reject that as well. So that one's pretty low hanging fruit, but,
what about redeems? Got any redeems?
A couple of redeems. I think one of the very first lines in the movie is the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. And I think that can be redeemed. I think the problem is where the movie finds love and how it defines love.
Again, that foundation that we're missing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for the Christian, the greatest thing we do get is the love of Christ, the sacrifice that Christ made for us, and the love of God through his grace and mercy, that we can call Christ our brother, and share in the salvation that he provided for us. So yeah, it is the greatest thing we'll ever learn to love Christ and to be loved by Christ. But without Christ as the foundation, then there's no point to.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when you said, I saw that was one of your points, and I'm like, I'm just gonna bounce off of it, but like literally the greatest commandment is love. The greatest of these is love, and that's how he sums up all the commandments, love of God and love of neighbor.
Yep.
And so the greatest of and then in the love passage in Corinthians, we have the faith, which we mentioned earlier, faith, hope, but again, the greatest of these is love. So I think that's a very good redeem, and kind of the whole point of this story. And that was, and even though it is, again, it's a tragic ending, but he had a great love, and now he's going to tell people about it. And just kind of reminds me, like, God had this great love for us, right? But he doesn't just have this great love for us. He didn't just save us. He gives us the Bible. He writes it down so that we don't forget. And that's the wonderful thing about stories, right? Is that we watch and read and listen to these stories because they do have some particles of truth in them. And it reminds us, again, like, I love watching this kind of movie. And you might not think that movie, like, about, a cabaret in this sense would make you think of different stories in the Bible. But, like, there were just so many things where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is a picture. This is a picture. It's not a complete or perfect picture. Like, again, lots of stuff reject. But it's a picture of what we can find in the Bible with God.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think we went through so much in this episode. I loved our conversation. Like, I could honestly go on probably for another hour or two. There's great. So much that we could talk about, but I think we gotta let the credits roll on this one. David's gotta edit this, so we don't want to make it too hard for him. So keep engaging movies and media from a godly perspective, and remember that you are not a mindless consumer.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.